As part of International Women's Day, I was invited to speak at the Houses of Parliament, and lots of you were really curious about what I spoke about. Firstly, it was quite a humbling experience to be invited to a place with such historical significance, and certainly very different from my day-to-day job as an NHS doctor. I spoke at the House of Lords, which is a place where no video recording can take place. And this is understandable because there are a lot of conversations that don't necessarily want to be made public. So I can't share my exact speech with you, but I can certainly tell you what I spoke about. In case you don't know me, I'm Dr. Faye, a neurology doctor and neuroscientist, and I specialised in understanding how the brain works, what happens when it goes wrong, as well as treating various neurological conditions. And what I really wanted to convey in my speech was the myths that surround women's brains and the constant criticism that women's brains get. The earliest instance where a woman's brain was criticized was actually in ancient Greece. Aristotle stated that women were by nature intellectually inferior. Yeah, I can feel the reaction through the screen. But him saying that led to this belief and an idea that was propagated through history and through centuries that women's brains are not built for mathematics, science, or leadership. Now, scientifically, this is not true. In maths, for example, many studies have shown that any historical gap in attainment was due to a lack of education rather than a lack of ability. But just saying a myth is false doesn't just erase all the consequences, and we do live with the consequences today. I, for example, was one of only 2 girls in my further maths and physics classes, and men still outnumber women vastly in neurosciences, particularly when it comes to leadership positions. I am reminded of this daily when I make the walk from the neurology department to the main hospital to see patients. There is a very long corridor that is lined with a portrait after portrait after portrait of men. And that is not to dismiss their achievements and their valuable contributions, but throughout history, we haven't been very good at educating women and promoting women so they can make those valuable contributions of their own. And as the saying goes, you cannot be what you cannot see. And then I spoke about myths that are slightly going under the radar when it comes to women's brains because they seem flattering to women, such as the idea that women are better than men at multitasking. Scientifically, when you study multitasking, you find that some people are better than others, but when you compare men and women, there is no significant difference. But again, this myth has consequences because it means that while men are given space to focus, women are expected to juggle. We know that at home, women shoulder a disproportionate amount of the mental load. And in the office, they are more likely to take on low-value administrative type tasks, what's known as the office housework. And this mental juggling act is exhausting and it has consequences. Neuroscientific studies show that in states of cognitive fatigue, which I call low power mode, there is a rise of glutamate in the prefrontal cortex. And this is the part of the brain that's responsible for focus, planning, decision-making, and emotion regulation. And women being constantly in lower power mode has an effect, particularly when it comes to the reduced emotion regulation. If you are in lower power mode, you are more likely to listen to those internal negative self-beliefs, your inner self-critic, in a way that affects both your personal well-being or your career progression. So what I wanted to convey in my speech was not for us to think the women and men's brains are identical. Sometimes this is a mistake that we make when it comes to equality. Thinking that women are basically small men leads to a lot of women's issues being sidelined. There are a lot of neurological conditions that disproportionately affect women. For example, migraine. This is the most common neurological issue that I see in clinic, and it disproportionately affects women. 1 in 5 women will have experienced migraine. And there are versions of migraine that almost exclusively affect women, such as menstrual migraine. And sidelining these issues means they're not investigated or studied. For example, in menstrual migraine, there are no drugs specifically licensed to treat this condition. And sure, the landscape is changing. I've been asked to be an investigator in a large trial looking at drugs for menstrual migraine. But what we really need is research into women's brains, because women's and men's brains are different. We need to study those differences, but this is really important. Different does not mean inferior. So what we need to do is we need to research women's brains, we need to invest in women's health, and we need to support women to thrive and fulfill their potential. Actually, the World Health Organization definition of brain health is not just to be free from disease, not just the absence of disease, but to be able to fulfill your potential. And we need to help women do just that, but without those outdated myths.